Hello. The first red flag should have been when Amber suggested we get married in December instead of June. I'd always dreamed of a summer wedding, but she insisted winter would be more romantic. What I didn't know then was that she'd already booked a June venue in Seattle for her other wedding. I met Amber through my real estate business in Portland. She was the most sought-after wedding planner in the Pacific Northwest, known for orchestrating elaborate celebrations that looked effortless. "Trust me, Ryan," she'd say, touching my arm in that way that made my heart race. "I do this for a living. I know exactly how to make our wedding perfect." And I did trust her, even when she started taking more business trips to Seattle. Even when she began keeping 2 phones, claiming one was strictly for her high-profile clients. Even when she suggested we keep our engagement quiet, just until the right moment. The truth started unraveling 3 months before our planned December wedding. I was meeting with a potential client in Seattle, a tech executive looking to buy property. We were having lunch at an upscale restaurant when I overheard a conversation at the next table about Amber's June wedding. My first thought was that they were discussing one of her clients. But then I heard them mention the groom's name, James Mitchell, a Seattle-based surgeon. I excused myself from my lunch meeting and followed the women to their car. They turned out to be bridesmaids for this other wedding, and they were more than happy to show me pictures on their phones. There was my fiancé, my Amber, trying on a different wedding dress, posing with a tall, distinguished-looking man in front of the Space Needle. The pieces fell into place like a grotesque puzzle. The separate phone, the frequent trips, the insistence on a winter wedding. She wasn't just planning 2 weddings, she was planning to be the bride in both. I sat in my car for hours, scrolling through her public wedding registry with James. They'd picked out china patterns and kitchen appliances just like we had, but their registry was dated 3 months before ours. That night I didn't confront her. I needed to understand the full scope of her deception. I hired a private investigator, who confirmed my worst fears. Amber had been dating James for 2 years, even before she met me. She'd crafted an elaborate scheme to marry both of us, planning to use her business travels to maintain 2 separate lives in 2 different cities. The investigator uncovered more. This wasn't Amber's first attempt at such a scheme. 3 years ago, she'd been engaged to 3 men simultaneously in different cities. She'd only been caught when one of them spotted her at an airport with another fiancé. She'd managed to talk her way out of it somehow, changed her name slightly, and moved to the Pacific Northwest to start fresh. As I sat in my home office, staring at the evidence spread across my desk, I realized that the woman I loved had never existed. She was a masterful creation, designed to fulfill whatever fantasy her targets desired. And I had been nothing but a mark in her elaborate con. The hardest part wasn't discovering Amber's betrayal. It was maintaining my composure around her while I gathered more information. Every touch, every kiss, every "I love you" felt like swallowing broken glass. But I needed to understand the full scope of her deception before I acted. The investigator's reports revealed layers of careful manipulation I never would have imagined. Amber had cultivated entirely separate social circles in each city. In Portland, she presented herself as Amber Lynn Wesley, the sophisticated wedding planner who'd grown up in Connecticut and attended Vassar. In Seattle, she was Amber Lynn Winters, the charming Southern belle who'd made her way west after graduating from Emory. She maintained different social media accounts, different friend groups, different everything. The level of detail was both impressive and terrifying. The weekend after my discovery, she was supposedly in Seattle for a client meeting. I tracked her iPhone's location to verify she was actually there at least. That evening, she called to tell me how much she missed me, her voice warm and intimate. "I can't wait to be your wife," she purred. "Just a few more months." I wondered if she'd made the same call to James right after. I found myself obsessing over James Mitchell. His social media painted the picture of a successful trauma surgeon, the kind of man who saved lives and donated to charity. He seemed genuine, accomplished, kind. In his photos with Amber, they looked like the perfect power couple, just like the photos of Amber and me. The next week, I made an appointment at his hospital, claiming to be a potential donor interested in their trauma center. When we met, I understood immediately why Amber had chosen him. James was charismatic, intelligent, and completely devoted to her. He proudly showed me pictures of their new house in Seattle's Queen and neighborhood, a historic Victorian they'd bought together. My stomach churned when I recognized the furniture Amber had picked out for our future home. That night, she called to discuss our wedding menu. "I'm thinking we should switch the fish option to salmon," she said casually. "It feels more Pacific Northwest." I agreed, knowing she'd already selected halibut for her Seattle wedding. Every conversation had become an exercise in detecting her lies. She never slipped, never showed a hint of guilt or hesitation. I started having trouble sleeping, eating, functioning normally. My business partners noticed, but I brushed off their concerns. How could I explain that my fiancé was orchestrating an elaborate double life? That every memory, every moment we'd shared, might have been nothing but carefully crafted fiction? The breaking point came when I found the notebook. Amber had left her laptop bag at my house, and inside was a small Moleskine planner. Contained detailed notes about both of us, James and me. Our likes, dislikes, daily routines, family members, favorite foods. She documented everything, treating us like characters she needed to keep straight in her ongoing performance. Next to my name was a note. "Remember, allergic to shellfish. No seafood at rehearsal dinner." Next to James's, "Allergic to penicillin." Mention concern about hospital work schedule. Reading through those clinical observations of our lives, I finally understood that Amber wasn't just a cheater or a liar. She was something far more calculated. This wasn't about love or even desire. It was about the thrill of orchestrating the perfect deception. She didn't want marriage. She wanted the challenge of maintaining two separate lives, two separate realities. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. Looking back, I realized that discovering Amber's deception forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. Why had I been so eager to believe in her perfectly crafted persona? What did it say about me that I'd missed or perhaps ignored the subtle inconsistencies in her stories? These questions haunted me as I formulated my plan. I reached out to James Mitchell through a burner email account, using a generic name and claiming to be a concerned friend of Amber's. He responded exactly as I expected, with polite skepticism and unwavering loyalty to her. His reply was thoughtful, measured, defending her character while maintaining professional courtesy. Reading his words, I felt an unexpected kinship with this man who, like me, had been carefully chosen and masterfully deceived. The next week, Amber called to tell me she needed to extend her Seattle trip by 2 days. "One of my biggest clients is having a crisis with their venue," she explained, her voice carrying that perfect note of professional frustration. "I hate being away from you longer, but you understand, right?" I assured her I did, knowing she was actually finalizing details for her other wedding. The ease with which she delivered these lies had stopped surprising me. What did surprise me was discovering that James wasn't her only other conquest. The investigator found evidence of a third man, Christopher Bennett, a finance executive in Vancouver. They'd been dating for 6 months, and while there was no engagement yet, Amber had already started laying the groundwork. She told him she was considering opening a branch of her wedding planning business in Vancouver, explaining her frequent trips between cities. The complexity of her deception was staggering. She maintained separate credit cards, different social circles, even slightly different personal styles for each city. In Portland, she wore her hair straight and favored classic, understated fashion. Seattle Amber had loose waves and a more bohemian aesthetic. Vancouver Amber wore her hair shorter and dressed in sharp business attire. These weren't just disguises. They were carefully crafted personalities, each designed to appeal to a specific type of man. I found myself studying her when she was with me, watching for the seams between her various personas. Sometimes I caught glimpses, a slight hesitation before answering questions about her past, a momentary flash of calculation behind her eyes when making plans. But these moments were so subtle, so masterfully incorporated into her performance, that I would have missed them if I hadn't been looking. The hardest part was realizing that some of what I'd loved about Amber might have been real. Her quick wit, her ability to read people, her talent for making everyone feel special. These weren't just acts. They were genuine skills she'd honed and weaponized. She was like a method actor who'd become so immersed in her roles that the line between performance and reality had blurred. One evening, as we lay in bed discussing wedding details, she absent-mindedly mentioned wanting peonies for her bouquet. "But they'll be hard to get in December," she sighed, then quickly added, "I mean, unless we pay a premium." I knew she'd already ordered peonies for her June wedding in Seattle. These small slips were rare, but they revealed the constant mental gymnastics required to maintain her deception. I spent hours contemplating how to confront her. A simple exposure seemed inadequate given the scale of her deception. She'd likely faced similar situations before and had proven skilled at talking her way out of them. No, this required something more elaborate, something that would dismantle not just one of her planned weddings, but her entire carefully constructed house of cards. The opportunity presented itself when she mentioned her upcoming bridal shower in Seattle. "Just a small gathering with some industry friends," she explained. "You don't need to come. It'll be all wedding people talking shop." What she didn't know was that I'd already received an invitation, not as her fiancé, but as someone else entirely. The invitation arrived in my work email under my professional real estate identity. Amber had never connected this part of my life to her Seattle world, and now her oversight would become her undoing. The bridal shower was being hosted at an exclusive rooftop venue, one that, coincidentally, belonged to a development company I frequently worked with. One call to the owner secured me not just access, but complete control over the event staff and security protocols. As I made preparations, I found myself reflecting on the patterns that had led us here. Amber's need for control, her compulsion to orchestrate perfect moments, her ability to compartmentalize relationships. These weren't just character flaws, they were symptoms of something deeper. I remembered how she'd once described her childhood. Constantly moving, never settling, always reinventing herself to fit new surroundings. "I learned early that people see what they want to see," she told me. At the time, I'd thought it was insight. Now I recognized it as a confession. The week before the shower, Amber was more distracted than usual. She'd slip away to take calls, claiming they were about client emergencies. I knew she was coordinating with her Seattle friends, ensuring every detail of her bridal shower was perfect. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her obsession with control would ultimately be her undoing. I reached out to James again, this time directly. We met at a quiet bar outside Seattle, away from Amber's usual haunts. He was exactly as I'd imagined: intelligent, successful, and completely devoted to the woman he thought he knew. When I showed him the evidence photos, emails, the notebook with her methodical notes about both of us, his professional composure cracked. I watched the same emotions I'd experienced play across his face: disbelief, anger, heartbreak, and finally, a cold determination. "She called me last night to discuss our honeymoon plans," he said, staring into his untouched whiskey. "She was so excited about the villa she'd found in Tuscany." I nodded, remembering Amber's enthusiastic description of the beachfront resort in Bali she'd chosen for our honeymoon. The same conversation, different destinations, both carefully selected to appeal to each of our travel preferences. Together, James and I pieced together more of her elaborate scheme. She'd planned to claim her wedding planning business was expanding, using this as an excuse to split time between cities after the weddings. She had detailed schedules mapped out, showing how she could maintain both marriages through careful manipulation of business trips and client emergencies. The level of premeditation was staggering. We also discovered more about Christopher in Vancouver. He wasn't just another target, he was her backup plan. If either of her weddings fell through, she had him perfectly positioned to step in. She'd even started introducing him to select friends in both Seattle and Portland, building a foundation for yet another version of herself. The night before the bridal shower, Amber called me from her business trip in Seattle. "I miss you," she said, her voice soft and intimate. "I can't wait to be married, to finally start our life together." As I listened to her practiced words, I thought about how many times she'd rehearsed similar conversations with James, with Christopher, perhaps with others we hadn't yet discovered. I told her I missed her too, that I was eager to see her when she returned. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already set everything in motion. The bridal shower she'd planned so meticulously was about to become something entirely different, a stage for her final performance. Though she didn't know it yet, the day of the bridal shower dawned bright and clear, the Seattle skyline crisp against the autumn sky. From my position in the venue's private office, I watched Amber arrive, radiant in a cream-colored dress that I recognized. She'd bought it for our engagement photos but claimed it had been ruined at the cleaners. Another small lie in her tapestry of deception. She moved through the room with practiced grace, greeting each guest with perfectly calibrated warmth. I recognized several faces from the investigators' photos, her Seattle friends, James's colleagues, even a few Portland connections she'd carefully cultivated for this alternate life. What struck me most was how naturally she adapted her persona for each interaction, subtly shifting her mannerisms and conversation topics to match her audience's expectations. The first phase of our plan began halfway through the event. Christopher arrived, ostensibly as a surprise guest representing a Vancouver venue interested in partnering with her business. I watched through the security feed as confusion flickered across her face, quickly masked by professional courtesy. She hadn't expected worlds to collide this way, but she was already adapting, crafting a narrative to maintain control. James arrived 20 minutes later, right on schedule. He made his entrance as we'd planned, carrying a large gift box and wearing the warm, loving smile of a devoted fiancé. Amber's composure slipped for just a moment, a barely perceptible freeze in her champagne toast. She recovered quickly, but I saw the calculations running behind her eyes as she tried to manage this unexpected convergence of her separate lives. That's when I made my entrance. Not through the main door, but from the private office where I'd been watching. I emerged just as Amber was explaining to Christopher that James was a client, while simultaneously trying to signal something to James with her eyes. The room fell silent as I walked toward her, still wearing the engagement ring she'd chosen so carefully. "Hello, Amber," I said quietly. Or should I say Amber Lynn Wesley? Or is it Winters today? I always have trouble keeping track. The transformation in her expression was remarkable: fear, anger, calculation, and finally, a strange sort of relief all flickering across her face in rapid succession. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, triggering the next phase of our plan. The venue's screens came to life, displaying a carefully edited montage. Amber with each of us in different cities, her various social media profiles, excerpts from her planning notebook detailing how to keep her stories straight. Her Seattle friends gasped as they saw photos of her Portland life. Her Portland connections stared in disbelief at evidence of her Seattle existence. "I've always admired your attention to detail," I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "The way you managed to plan 2 weddings without anyone noticing the overlap. The careful scheduling of your time between cities. Even the different wedding color schemes you chose to ensure no common guests would notice similarities in your photos." James stepped forward then, adding his piece to the narrative. Christopher joined us, completing the triangle that surrounded her. Each of us held evidence of her deceptions: emails, photos, journal entries. The room had become utterly silent, every guest frozen in place, watching the elaborate facade crumble. But Amber wasn't finished surprising us. Instead of denying everything or trying to run, she started laughing. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before, raw and genuine, lacking the careful modulation she usually employed. "You know what's funny?" she said, looking between the 3 of us. "This is the first time I've felt truly seen. No more performances, no more juggling personalities. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is? Being exactly what everyone wants all the time." Her words hit me like a physical blow, not because they excused her actions, but because they revealed the deep brokenness that had driven them. In that moment, I saw her clearly for the first time, not as the woman I'd loved, or the manipulator who'd deceived us, but as someone so desperate to be wanted that she'd fragmented herself into multiple lives rather than risk being rejected for who she really was. The aftermath was both more and less dramatic than I'd expected. There were tears, accusations, and revelations that shocked even those of us who thought we'd uncovered everything. Both wedding venues had been booked with fraudulent deposits. The house she'd bought with James had been partially paid for with money she'd embezzled from her Portland clients. Every layer we peeled back revealed new deceptions. As I watched her world implode, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for all the genuine connections she'd sacrificed in pursuit of her elaborate fantasies. The revenge I'd planned so carefully didn't bring the closure I'd expected. Instead, it taught me something about the complexity of human nature, how the same qualities that draw us to someone can be the seeds of their destruction. In the end, Amber left Seattle that day alone, her carefully constructed lives scattered like confetti around the room she'd chosen to celebrate one of her many planned futures. The last time I saw her, she was walking toward the elevator, head held high, still somehow maintaining the poise she'd practiced for so long. Just before the doors closed, she turned and smiled. Not one of her practiced, perfect smiles, but something smaller and more real. "You know," she called out, "you three are the only men who ever really saw through me. Maybe I chose better than I thought." The elevator doors closed, and just like that, she was gone. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos. Bye.